Chapter 20. In the Quiver of the Almighty. It would have taken a more phlegmatic person than Joseph to withstand the barrage of favorable newspaper publicity that he received in the spring of 1842. The New York Herald, New York Tatler, and Boston Bee all wrote lavish encomiums, spiced with enough mockery to please the Gentile public. "There is some good in every sect of religion," wrote Bennett of the Herald in a whimsical mood, "and we give fair support to all, from the Pope of Rome to Joe Smith. All we ask in return for our reports is a good cool seat, bench, or location when the end of the world comes and the everlasting bonfire begins." Joseph ignored the mockery and republished Bennett's columns, carefully expurgated in the Times and Seasons. He was not one to quibble over details when he could reprint a paragraph like the following: "This Joe Smith is undoubtedly one of the greatest characters of the age. He indicates as much talent, originality, and moral courage as Mahomet, Odin, or any of the great spirits that have hitherto produced the revolutions of past ages. While modern philosophy, which believes in nothing but what you can touch, is overspreading the Atlantic states, Joe Smith is creating a spiritual system, combined also with morals and industry, that may change the destiny of the race." The Prophet repaid James Gordon Bennett with an honorary LL.D. from the University of Nauvoo, with a brigadier generalship in the Nauvoo Legion, and with the keys to the city. This was no mere gracious gesture acknowledging an unsolicited favor. It was a bid for Bennett's permanent support. For Joseph took the acclaim seriously. Here was the first editor of national prominence to describe the personage Joseph believed himself to be. 13 years' adoration from his people had crystallized his abiding sense of destiny. Assault, apostasy, bankruptcy, and imprisonment he had weathered imperturbably, for each trouble had been transformed into a symbol of his special calling. Disaster had been a springboard from which he leaped to new successes. It was now easy for him to believe the simplest and most gratifying explanation for his success, that God had willed it. Without that belief he could not have spoken so exuberantly in his name. Joseph accepted the newspaper effusions exultingly. They helped sharpen his self-consciousness, giving him a perspective on his position in the American scene that he had long sensed but never clearly formulated. He began to speculate on the role of this prophet in human society and evolved a theory of government suited to the empire he proposed to build. "The great and wise of ancient days have failed in all their attempts to promote eternal power, peace, and happiness," he wrote. "Their nations have crumbled to pieces, their thrones have been cast down in their turn, and their cities and their mightiest works of art have been annihilated, or their dilapidated towers of time-worn monuments have left us but feeble traces of their former magnificence and ancient grandeur. They proclaim as with a voice of thunder those imperishable truths, that man's strength is weakness, his wisdom is folly, his glory is his shame." Monarchical, aristocratical, and republican governments of their various kinds and grades have, in their turn, been razed to dignity and prostrated in the dust. History records their puerile plans, their short-lived glory, their feeble intellect, and their ignoble deeds. Have we increased in knowledge and intelligence? Where is there a man that can step forth and alter the destiny of nations and promote the happiness of the world? The answer, he said, was clear to every man who hungered after righteousness. The ideal government was a theocracy, a government by a prophet specially chosen to administer the laws of God. This government, he wrote, is the only thing that can bring about the restitution of all things spoken of by all the holy prophets. The world has had a fair trial for 6,000 years. The Lord will try the 7,000th himself. This was no mere word-spinning. It is clear that Joseph was coming to look upon himself as the key figure in the setting up of a great religious kingdom which would free the earth from oppression, tyranny, and bloodshed. How much the glowing newspaper accounts contributed to this thinking cannot be easily measured, but there is no doubt that they betrayed Joseph into rashness. The fact that the Eastern editors talked openly of a Mormon empire obscured his view of the prodigious obstacles to any such enterprise. Actually, he was far less secure than he knew, and his public displays of power did more to undermine him than to sustain him. The Legion paraded too openly and too often for the good of the saints. If he would take friendly advice, the editor of the Sangamo Journal in Springfield wrote curtly on January 21, 1842, "We would say, let some Joshua, the son of Nun, lead the armies, and let him stick to the interpretation and prophecy, for we do assure him upon an honest belief that his situation in Illinois is far more dangerous than ever it was in Missouri if he undertakes to take Mahomet's part." The Legion was not the only irritation. Joseph now began playing politics in earnest. His people had voted the Whig ticket in 1840 and again in 1841, but he had made it clear from the beginning that his vote could be swung on a moment's notice. When the Democrats selected as candidates for governor and lieutenant governor in the election of 1842 Adam W. Snyder and John Moore, both of whom had been active in getting the Mormon charters through the legislature, the prophet decided to shift the Mormon vote back to the Democratic Party. He bared this intention with a proclamation that set both parties back on their heels. To my friends in Illinois, the gubernatorial convention of the state of Illinois has nominated Colonel Adam W. Snyder for governor and Colonel John Moore for lieutenant governor of the state of Illinois. Election to take place in August next general. General Bennett informs us that no men were more efficient in assisting him to procure our great chartered privileges than were Colonel Snyder and Colonel Moore. They are sterling men and friends of equal rights opposed to the oppressor's grasp and the tyrant's rod. With such men at the head of our state, government will have nothing to fear. In the next canvass we shall be influenced by no party consideration. We care not a fig for Whig or Democrat. They are both alike to us. But we shall go for our friends, our tried friends, and the cause of human liberty, which is the cause of God. We are aware that divide and conquer is the watchword with many, but with us it cannot be done. We love liberty too well. We have suffered too much to be easily duped. We have no cat's paws among us. Stephen A. Douglas, is a master spirit, and his friends are our friends. Snyder and Moore are his friends. They are ours. We will never be justly charged with the sin of ingratitude. They have served us, and we will serve them. Joseph Smith, Lieutenant General of the Nauvoo Legion. The Democrats, although happy to get the Mormon vote, were frankly embarrassed by this proclamation. This open sellout so early in the campaign simply handed the Whigs a weapon. They were quick to use it. The Alton Telegraph said on June 4, "This issuing a proclamation on the part of Joe Smith as Lieutenant General of the Nauvoo Legion, commanding his followers to vote for this or that candidate, is too bold a stride towards despotism ever to be long countenanced by a free and intelligent people." Joseph Duncan, the Whig candidate for governor, made repeal of the Mormon charters a basic plank in his platform and took the stump against the foreigners who were pouring into Nauvoo. The Sangamo Journal, chief organ of the Whig Party, noting the publicity accorded Joseph in the columns of the New York Herald, republished appropriate sections with cryptic warnings. One of James Gordon Bennett's editorials the Whigs found particularly humiliating. May not this wonderful Mormon movement be the signal for a new religious revolution? Is Joe Smith its master spirit and General Bennett its military spirit? In Illinois they have already shown how to acquire power and influence by holding the balance of power between both great parties. They can already dictate to the state of Illinois, and if they pursue the same policy in other states, will they not soon dictate to Congress and decide the presidency? Nowhere did the fires of political resentment burn more furiously than in Warsaw, biggest non-Mormon town in Hancock County. Normally Democratic, the citizens here were not content with a switch to the Whigs, but endeavored to start an anti-Mormon party, which would draw its strength from the Democrats as well. The editors of the Warsaw paper, Thomas Sharp and Thomas Gregg, carried on a gusty feud with William Smith, who edited the new secular newspaper in Nauvoo called The Wasp. William set the pace in the first number of The Wasp by calling Thomas Sharp a contemptible demagogue and a complete jackass of an editor, to which Sharp replied in choice frontier diction, "We have received the first number of a new 6 by 9, recently started at Nauvoo, yclept The Wasp. Of the varmint itself we have nothing to say, further than that the title is a perfect misnomer. If it had been called Polecat, its name would then have corresponded perfectly with the character of its contents. It is needless to inform our readers that we don't fight with such animals, nature having given them a decided advantage." This article William reprinted in The Wasp with a squib beneath, "Well done, Tom, ass." Joseph had little of William's crudeness, but both men had a certain earthiness and rough vigor that none of the other brothers seems to have possessed. "Josiah Butterfield came to my house," Joseph wrote in his journal one day, "and insulted me so outrageously that I kicked him out of the house, across the yard, and into the street." Here was a prophet who could hold his own with any man on the frontier. Tough, hard-headed leaders like Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball, who abominated sanctimonious humbug, never found Joseph guilty of it. Much of the asceticism of the Kirtland era disappeared in Nauvoo. There were many days when the prophet gave himself over completely to the pleasures of the average man, attending the tent theaters that came into the city, frequenting band concerts and lectures on phrenology — only mesmerists and magicians were denied an audience in Nauvoo — and giving cotillion parties in his big new hotel home, the Nauvoo Mansion. Although Joseph controlled the dispensing of liquor and preached against grog shops, he nevertheless permitted the construction of a brewery and allowed it to advertise its beer and ale in the Nauvoo neighbor. The ardent temperance crusaders in the city must have been discouraged by the prophet's unwillingness to cooperate with them. It was reported to me, he wrote in his journal one day, that some of the brethren had been drinking whiskey that day in violation of the word of wisdom. I called the brethren in and investigated the case, and was satisfied that no evil had been done, and gave them a couple of dollars with directions to replenish the bottle to stimulate them in the fatigues of their sleepless journey. When Janetta Richards presented him with the bottle of wine made by her mother in England, he drank it with relish and noted the incident in his journal without apology. For every convert who was shocked by such indulgence, there was a score who were further endeared to the prophet by it. His good-humored tolerance of human frailty lost him no strong men. An anecdote in the unpublished diary of Oliver Huntington drolly reflects Joseph's attitude towards temperance. Robert Thompson was a faithful, just clerk for Joseph Smith the prophet in Nauvoo. He wrote, and had been in his office steady near or quite 2 years. Joseph said to Brother Thompson one day, Robert, I want you to go and get on a bust. Go and get drunk and have a good spree. If you don't, you'll die. Robert did not do it, Huntington concluded soberly. He was a very pious, exemplary man, and never guilty of such an impropriety as he thought that to be. In less than 2 weeks he was dead and buried. Joseph was friendly and hospitable to the hundreds of tourists who were attracted to Nauvoo. Steamboats plying up and down the river stopped regularly to discharge visitors, who were ceremoniously conducted on a tour of the city, including visits to see the mummies, the baptismal font, and the temple, which was fast becoming an imposing monument. The prophet had few illusions about the tourists who wanted a personal interview. When one preacher admitted frankly, I have no particular business, but I have taken the liberty to call on you, Joseph replied with a wry humor, a good many call on me that way, to satisfy their curiosity and go away and say, well, I've seen Joe Smith. Some of them say he's pretty good looking, smart fellow. He looks as though he knew something, as if he was not the fool and knave he had been called. But others go away and say, well, I've seen Joe Smith. He's a great blubber-mouthed fellow, a knave, a drunkard, a mean, ignorant fellow. One visitor, Henry Caswell, an Episcopalian preacher from a St. Louis college, armed himself with an ancient manuscript psalter written in Greek and pretending to be ignorant of its contents, offered it to Joseph for his scrutiny. Under the prophet's questioning, he finally admitted that he believed the language to be Greek, but this Joseph contradicted. Caswell, exaggerating the imperfections of Joseph's grammar, later related the story as follows. No, it ain't Greek at all, Joseph said, except perhaps a few words. What ain't Greek is Egyptian, and what ain't Egyptian is Greek. This book is very valuable. It is a dictionary of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Pointing to the capital letters at the commencement of each verse, he went on. Them figures is Egyptian hieroglyphics, written in Reformed Egyptian. Them characters is like the letters that was engraved on the golden plates. When the prophet left the room, Caswell turned triumphantly to the men present and exposed the trick. They appeared confounded for a while, he wrote, but at length the Mormon doctor said, sometimes Mr. Smith speaks as a prophet, and sometimes as a mere man. If he gave the wrong opinion respecting the book, he spoke as a mere man. This defense Joseph would readily have subscribed to himself. Weary of the restrictions imposed by the dignity of his office, annoyed by tales of converts who apostatized when they saw him playing with his children or wrestling with his friends, Joseph often said impatiently, a prophet is a prophet only when he is acting as such. Perhaps the most deliberate hoax ever played on Joseph Smith was contrived by 3 men in the nearby town of Kinderhook. One of them, Bridge Whitten, cut 6 copper sheets into the shape of a bell, and the other 2, Robert Wiley and Wilbur Fugate, covered them with a fanciful writing by the simple etching process. They smeared acid over the plates to corrode them, bound them together with a piece of rusted hoop iron, and carefully buried them along with some Indian bones in an Indian mound nearby that had been an object of much curiosity and desultory digging. Wiley spread the story that he had dreamed of buried treasure 3 nights in succession, and invited assistance in hunting for it. 2 Mormons were present when the plates were found. Although they had suspected a hoax, the sight of the corroded plates banished their mistrust. Shouting for joy, they begged to take them to the prophet for deciphering, but before giving them up, Wiley was careful to clean them with sulfuric acid so that the hieroglyphics could easily be read. The whole of Nauvoo soon buzzed with the discovery. The Times and Seasons published full reproductions as further proof of the authenticity of the Book of Mormon, and the printing office sold facsimiles at $1 a dozen. Joseph stated in his journal that he translated a portion and discovered it to be a history of the person whose bones lay in the mound, a descendant of Ham, through the loins of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. If the Kinderhook conspirators expected to see another Book of Abraham result from their deception, they were disappointed. Perhaps Joseph had been made cautious by the Greek psalter trick, which Caswell had described in a nasty anti-Mormon tract. Perhaps he had noted in the New York Herald, which he read regularly, that the Egyptian language had finally been deciphered and a grammar published in England. At any rate, he never published a partial translation, and apparently did not even venture to suggest that the language was Reformed Egyptian. The plates were sold to a St. Louis museum, and Fugate did not publicly admit the fraud until 36 years afterward. Although Joseph was done with translations, he never ceased delighting in exhibiting his linguistic talents. Occasionally in his letters and printed appeals for national support, he made proud displays which so embarrassed later historians of his church that they were quietly deleted from the official histories. The most notorious example was his appeal to the freemen of the state of Vermont, the brave Green Mountain Boys and honest men, in which, with a blithe disregard for accuracy, he quoted from 17 foreign languages. Were I a Chaldean, I would exclaim, Kidauna tamarun lemula elnomla ve'arkaudu gnabdu yabadu bam komin tehoet shemana Allah. Thus shall ye say unto them, the gods that have not made the heavens and earth, they shall perish from the earth and from these heavens. An Egyptian, Sueni. What other persons are these? Aggression, Diabolos bisulue. The devil reigns. A Frenchman, Monsieur sans Dieu. Gentleman without God. A Turk, Anchem, the fountain of light. A German, Sie sind unverstandig. What consummate ignorance. A Syrian, Zaubak, sacrifice. A Spaniard, Il sabio muda concio, il necio no. A wise man reflects, a fool does not. A Samaritan, Sanao, O stranger. An Italian, O tempa, O diffidenza. O the times, O the diffidence. A Hebrew, Atau al raudoi, thou God seest me. A Dane, Havat tidende. What tidings? A Saxon, wait right, what right? A Swede, Havad skilja, what skill? A Polander, Neyen shuba ponan Jesu Christus, blessed be the name of Jesus Christ. A Western Indian, Shimoka te ogana. The white man, oh the white man, he very uncertain. A Roman, Procul, o procul este profani. Be off, ye profane. But as I am, I will only add, when the wicked rule, the people mourn. When Josiah Quincy and Charles Francis Adams visited the prophet, he conducted them personally on a tour about Nauvoo. Quincy wrote in his journal a detailed account of their conversation. As they passed the entrance to the temple, he said, Joseph stopped before a workman who was chiseling an immense face into the rock of a capstone. General Smith, queried the man, looking up from his task, is this like the face you saw in the vision? Very near it, answered the prophet, except, and this, Quincy said, was added with an air of careful connoisseurship that was quite overpowering, except that the nose is just a thought too broad. As they entered the Nauvoo Museum, Joseph introduced Lucy Smith. This is my mother, gentlemen. The curiosities we shall see belong to her. They were purchased with her own money at a cost of $6,000. Opening pine presses along the wall, he disclosed 4 black shrunken bodies. These are mummies, he said. I want you to look at that little runt of a fellow over there. He was a great man in his day. Why, that was Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt. He pointed to various hieroglyphs on the papyri, which were preserved under glass. That is the handwriting of Abraham, the father of the faithful. This is the autograph of Moses, and these lines were written by his brother Aaron. Here we have the earliest accounts of the creation, from which Moses composed the first book of Genesis. When Quincy questioned him about a drawing of serpent walking about on a pair of legs, he expanded heartily. Why, that's as plain as pikestaff. Before the fall, snakes always went about on legs just like chickens. They were deprived of them in punishment for their agency in the ruin of man. Although Quincy looked upon his exhibitionism as unexampled absurdity, he was not thereby blinded to the prophet's positive talents. His first impression had been favorable. A fine-looking man is what the passerby would instinctively have murmured upon meeting the remarkable individual, he wrote. And after conversing several hours, listening to one of his sermons, and making a tour of the orderly city, magnificently laid out and teeming with activity and enterprise, he was ready to acknowledge that this man, more than almost any he had ever met, was best endowed with that kingly faculty which directs, as by intrinsic right, the feeble or confused souls who are looking for guidance. Quincy's account is the most sagacious of all the commentaries written by travelers to Nauvoo. If the reader does not know just what to make of Joseph Smith, he concluded, I cannot help him out of the difficulty. I myself stand helpless before the puzzle. What had overpowered Josiah Quincy, as indeed it did most of the prophet's visitors, was Joseph's magnificent self-assurance. Increased success had served to intensify his boldness and exuberance. The zest for living that he radiated never failed to inspire his own people with a sense of the richness of life. They followed him slavishly and devotedly, if only to warm themselves in the glow of his presence. They built for him, preached for him, and made unbelievable sacrifices to carry out his orders, not only because they were convinced he was God's prophet, but also because they loved him as a man. They were as elated when he won a wrestling match as they were awed when he dictated a new revelation. They retold tales of his generosity and tenderness, marveling that he fed so many of the poor in Nauvoo at his table without stint, and that he entertained friend and enemy alike. He was a genial host, warm-hearted and friendly to all comers, and fiercely loyal to his friends. Joseph was no hair-shirt prophet. He believed in the good life, with moderate self-indulgence in food and drink, occasional sport, and good entertainment, and that he succeeded in enjoying himself to the hilt detracted not at all from the semi-deification with which his own people enshrouded him. Any protests of impropriety dissolved before his personal charm. Man is that he might have joy, might have been one of his first significant pronouncements in the Book of Mormon, and from that belief he had never deviated. He was gregarious, expansive, and genuinely fond of people, and it is no accident that his theology in the end discarded all traces of Calvinism and became an ingenuous blend of supernaturalism and materialism, which promised in heaven a continuation of all earthly pleasures, work, wealth, sex, and power. Since Joseph was himself the personification of the church, its hero and ideal, whatever he did became a pattern for imitation. Because he took Christian theology and ethics and mixed them with the business, politics, and empire building, his people came to do the same. The result was that Mormonism became not only a belief but also a way of life. It had never pretended to be a mystical sanctification or even a new ethical code. As a religion, it was as raw-boned and pragmatic as Joseph himself, and as dynamic. Although the prophet was the prime mover in all Mormon thinking and activity, he was himself tremendously affected by the powerful social unit he had created. As thousands of converts poured in from the East and Canada and the British Isles, the increasing pressure of administrative duties, of settling and housing these people and getting work for them, diverted his energy more and more into secular affairs. But there was an equally insistent pressure upon his inner character. These thousands looked to him to usher in the millennium. They clamored for spiritual enlightenment and demanded to know the laws of the kingdom of God. Joseph gave them the best that was in him, without affidavits, witnesses, or apology. And to one who reads through his sermons and journal for this period, it must seem that the role of prophet had finally swallowed up the man. But he had moods of uncertainty and doubt, and could occasionally step out of himself and look with humor at what he had become. When Josiah Quincy said to him, "It seems to me, General, that you have too much power to be safely trusted to one man," he replied, "In your hands or that of any other man, so much power would, no doubt, be dangerous. I am the only man in the world whom it would be safe to trust it with. Remember, I am a prophet." But these last 5 words, Quincy said, were spoken in a rich, comical aside, as if in hearty recognition of the ridiculous sound they might have in the ears of a Gentile. Now and then he startled his own people with an expression of detachment and irony. Once, when introducing the Whig politician Cyrus Walker to his people, he turned to him and said with a little smile, "These are the greatest dupes, as a body of people, that ever lived, or I am not so big a rogue as I am reported to be." On another occasion he confessed with simple candor, "I do not think that there have ever been many good men on earth since the days of Adam, but there was one good man, and his name was Jesus. I love that man better who swears a stream as long as my arm, yet deals justice to his neighbors and mercifully deals his substance to the poor, than the long, smooth-faced hypocrite. I do not want you to think I am very righteous, for I am not. God judges men according to the use they make of the light which he gives them." But such moods were momentary. He went on in this same sermon with a vivid self-characterization that more genuinely represented what Joseph had come to believe himself to be. "I am like a huge rough stone rolling down from a high mountain, and the only polishing I get is when some corner gets rubbed off by coming in contact with something else, striking with accelerated force against religious bigotry, priestcraft, lawyercraft, doctorcraft, lying editors, suborned judges, and jurors, and the authority of perjured executives, backed by mobs, blasphemers, licentious and corrupt men and women, all hell knocking off a corner here and a corner there. Thus will I become a smooth and polished shaft in the quiver of the Almighty, who will give me dominion over all and every one of them, when their refuge of lies shall fail, and their hiding place shall be destroyed."